it is not the fault of millennials that they can't get a house, because there's a certain narrative around, this idea that it's something young people aren't doing right, they're not saving enough, they're spending too much on whatever, avocado toast, or too many subscriptions to Netflix, or whatever it is that no, it's nothing that people who can't get a house are doing. It's not their fault. It is the way our housing system has kind of evolved over the last, and I kind of put the crisis starting kind of almost 30 years ago. When you're looking kind of the late 80s, 1990s, we did two things. We stopped building council housing. The local authorities were essentially told by government, stop building. And at the same time, you had the rise of the Celtic Tiger, when people started looking, and were told to look at housing not as a home, but as a property investment. And this whole thing started of people not just buying one home, but buying multiple properties. And the banks were fueling money at them, and government was giving them tax breaks. And we essentially kind of got lost in this idea that, housing was no longer home. It was an investment asset, and everybody, certain amount of people could make a lot of money from it, and government doesn't have to build social housing anymore, and the market will do it. And
this millennial generation, they are the first generation, because it is factual that they're the first generation that will potentially be worse off than their parents. And that's never happened before.
No, it's not. Since the foundation of this state, we are, for the first time in our history, dealing with and have created a situation where a generation of young people are worse off, and are going to be worse off if we continue as we are, than their parents. And the other historical thing is that it is the first time that people are not emigrating because of the lack of jobs, but because of the lack of housing. That has never happened in this country.
You did say, if we continue the way we're going. So
Yeah.
I'm sensing that there is hope, and there is a potential for this nightmare scenario to change, but what needs to happen?
Yeah, that's a really important point, and I tried to talk about that in the book. And I do talk about it. What I tried to get across is the book is not just about where are we, why are we here, what's going on.
Well, even the title is Why No One Can Get a Gaff, and what we can do about it.
Exactly.
So what is it?
I think there is huge hope, and the reason I have so much hope is because we've seen such social change in this country. Younger generations, and across the generations. Marriage equality, repeal, conversations around mental health, all these things. We are a changed country, and there's a real sense that we can do things. And around housing, I feel the same, that all the people locked out, they're not looking for multiple property investments. They're looking for a home. And they understand that housing and the housing system needs to, number one, its function is to produce homes for people, not to produce investment assets for global REITs or landlords. And so there's a change. And I feel really hopeful, because when the values change and when people's attitudes change, politics has to follow at some point. Policies have to follow.
Sinn Féin were talking up, talking very big talk over the weekend in terms of they can completely fix the housing crisis if they can just get their feet under the desks. I mean, is that going to change anything if it's just a shift of personnel in the government?
I think a shift of personnel isn't going to change it. I think the policies have to change really radically. I think our Department of Housing, our whole state, how we do it, the local authorities, they have to change. How we think about housing has to change. I think this is what I kind of thought, is there has to be this cultural almost revolution in how we think about housing. And as I said, that is changing amongst younger generations. I think the older generations are starting to realise when their kids are knocking around at late 20s, 30s in the house and going, why aren't you getting out? And they're like, well, there's nowhere to go. And they're going, oh, why is that? And I think that conversation that needs to have across the generations. And so I think that a change of government, it's likely to see change, but is it going to see significant change? I think without the societal change, without the change in attitudes that's demanding something very, very different, because when Sinn Féin go in there, the civil servants will be telling, you can't really do that.
Because the civil servants don't change. We all need to remember that the same people in the same jobs sit there, whether the government is this or that. So as you're saying, it's a seismic societal change that needs to happen.
And renting, that it's you're, as I say, it's a stepping stone until you eventually get your mortgage. But other countries don't think like that. But I guess we're being forced to think like that now.
We are, but we've a problem, which is that our rental sector, our private rental sector, is not like other European countries. They don't like this idea that you can be evicted even though you pay the rent, you never do anything wrong, just because the landlord is selling the property. That doesn't exist in other European countries. You can't evict someone who's doing everything right just because you're selling the property. They have to stay in place because it's their home. So it's not just, we do have to make a huge shift in how we think about this.
Dermot and Dave.
Conversation, crack,
And the music you love.
Today FM.
It all happens here.